Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Wow, that was real sad. Everybody's after lunch, everybody's sleeping. Let's try again. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, all right, you're awake. Yay, much better. Welcome to Use Your Salesforce Powers for Good. Or this title, which was not accepted by our marketing department, but just don't tell anyone, that's the actual name of this session. Cool, yeah, no pictures. It's fine, you can take pictures, it's fine. It's too late. They're gonna fire me, they can do it. All right, just before we begin, a quick note that you should base your purchasing decisions only on products and features that are currently available. My name is Mark Bassman, and I'm an admin evangelist here with Salesforce.
And I'm Jason Wirtz, Pro Bono Content Specialist at salesforce.org.
Here is the fun stuff that we're going to talk about today. We're going to give you a little bit of background on nonprofits and the nonprofit sector as a whole, talking about some specific use cases for nonprofits and Salesforce. Then we're going to do a bit of a technical deep dive into the Nonprofit Success Pack, and then we'll talk about some general volunteering best practices. So you guys ready to do it? All right.
Yes. Can I have that? Thank you very much.
Yep.
We're here today to tell you that you have superpowers. You may have already known that, but yes, you have superpowers. You have Salesforce powers. And you can do some really cool things with nonprofits. And I'm going to give you an example. MyAgro is a nonprofit organization based in Maui. They help small farmers in remote villages save money to buy seed and fertilizer. These small farmers often live hours, if not days, away from the nearest bank, so most of them don't have a bank account. Now, can you imagine operating a business without a bank account? I mean, how would you save money to invest back into your business and grow your business? So MyAgro came up with a pretty ingenious solution for this problem. They thought, well, what if there was a way that these small farmers could use something they already have, a mobile phone, to save money? And they did it. They came up with a really cool program. They built a bankless mobile savings program on Salesforce. And this was a huge hit with customers. Before they knew it, they had over 30,000 customers in Salesforce. And this really stretched the original configuration of their Salesforce org. So they turned to a couple of volunteers for help. And with the help of these volunteers, they optimized Salesforce to serve 10 times as many farmers. That's some 300,000 farmers that can now save money, invest back in their businesses, and help move themselves and their families out of poverty. So that's what your Salesforce powers, that's what they're capable of. So before we get started with today's presentation, I have a couple questions. First of all, how many of you in here work for nonprofits? Yay. Woo! Awesome. Thank you very much. The other question I have is whether or not any of you have actually used your Salesforce powers for good. So how many folks in this room have volunteered to help a nonprofit with their Salesforce org? Big hand, raise hand. Okay. Okay, so that's great. That's great. So maybe about half the room. So regardless of your volunteer history or your volunteering history, you should walk out of this session today with some new tips for how to use your Salesforce powers for good. So let's start the presentation by talking about what makes a nonprofit organization different from the companies you may be working with right now. So when it comes to nonprofits, most nonprofits are pretty small. In the US, 75% of nonprofits have revenue of less than $500,000, and we found that to be pretty consistent in other regions around the world too. The other fairly common thing about nonprofits is they tend to run pretty lean, especially when it comes to technology. And there's a couple of reasons for this, but I'm going to highlight one. Individual and institutional donors often put restrictions on how nonprofits can use donations. And unfortunately, there are a lot of donors that just don't see the potential in technology to drive social change. So as a result of having fairly small budgets and restrictions on donations, nonprofits tend to have a limited capacity to support and develop technology. So when you go out into the world and you volunteer for a nonprofit, keep this in mind. And don't expect to work with a dedicated system admin. Most likely, you're going to work with somebody we call the also admin. So the also admin on a nonprofit wears many, many different hats. They're juggling a number of different job responsibilities. They also tend to be the expert by default because they showed some degree of tech savviness. I mean, maybe they're using Facebook, social media. I mean, they've displayed some kind of tech savviness, and by default, they become the experts. Also, admins are also purpose-driven. Okay, there's a reason they work at a nonprofit organization, and it is not the pay. I know this firsthand. I've worked at a number of nonprofits, and I did not do it for the pay. Let me tell you that right now. So it's really important when you're developing your solutions that you help the also admin understand how the technology is going to help the nonprofit advance its mission. And before we move on, I want to give you one quick example. So there's a nonprofit on the East Coast that manages a 120-acre community farm, a large community garden, and a farmer's market. They also deliver a variety of programs around healthy eating and nutrition for low-income families, and they do all of this with just 5 employees. Just 5 employees. Their also admin is their executive director, literally the person in charge of the entire organization. So he's managing relationships with the board of directors. He's out there trying to raise money to keep the lights on. And oh, by the way, he's also generating donor thank you letters in Drawloop. So keep that in mind when you're working with your also admin. They've got a lot on their plate. And now I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Mark.
Thanks, Jason. So what does Salesforce.org actually provide nonprofits as part of the donation? So they get one Enterprise Edition Salesforce instance with 10 user licenses. You'll notice I have a little note here, no sharing allowed. Any guesses why that's on there? Well, guess what? It is very popular for people to share user licenses. This is a violation of our terms of use, so the legal department says that's a real big no-no. But more importantly, if you as a volunteer are using the user license of someone who is potentially a staff member, it will be unclear going back in the audit log, who made those changes? Was it the staff person or you, the volunteer? So please don't share, get your own dedicated user license. Also, Salesforce.org provides the Nonprofit Success Pack. I'm going to go into much more detail about the NPSP in a bit. The Nonprofit Success Pack is an app that's been created by Salesforce.org to help nonprofits manage their information. I'll talk in much more detail in a minute. Also, Salesforce.org provides nonprofits access to the Power of Us Hub online community. Are there any members of the Hub here today? Just raise your hands. Awesome, yay, thank you Hub members. The Power of Us Hub is a dedicated online community for nonprofits using Salesforce and higher education institutions using Salesforce. It's like the Trailblazer community, but one that's specific to that customer base. Salesforce.org also provides nonprofits with a whole slew of getting started resources, and of course, everything that .com customers get. Trailhead, there are some nonprofit trails, which is awesome. There are also dedicated nonprofit user groups. So if you have a user group and you attend a user group in your neighborhood, there's probably a nonprofit user group nearby as well. So lots and lots of great stuff. But that's not all. It's not just access to the application and the app and the online community. It's also, there are a whole suite of consulting partners that are dedicated to help support nonprofits. And these can be found on the salesforce.org website. Also, the App Exchange has a whole bunch of nonprofit-specific apps, so things like online donation and wealth scoring and research. There are apps in the App Exchange tailored for the nonprofit industry, and there's actually a whole collection. So if you go to the App Exchange, you can find the industry for nonprofits. Also, Salesforce.org has products for higher education, like our higher education data architecture and Salesforce Advisor Link products. And there are products for K-12 schools as well. You probably won't encounter these in your volunteering lives, but if you do, just know that these products are indeed also available from Salesforce.org, and you can get all the help and documentation about them in the Power of Us Hub. So the Nonprofit Success Pack, the NPSP. Ta-da, here it is. It can fill your gas tank and slice bread. The NPSP is awesome. The NPSP is designed for nonprofits from the beginning. This is built with a community of nonprofits, our implementation partners, and Salesforce.org engineering staff. The NPSP is the core of the connected nonprofit. This is really a flexible, open data architecture with some pre-built components to help nonprofits manage information about donors, donations, et cetera, et cetera. This is really, it is an incredible app, and if you haven't experienced it before as a potential volunteer, this is something that you're definitely going to want to read up on. I'm going to go into some more technical detail and do the ever risky live demo in a little bit. Now back to Jason for some use cases.
Great. So now that you know some of the things that nonprofits have access to, I'm going to walk you through two of probably the most popular ways that nonprofits use Salesforce, and that's for fundraising and to manage volunteers. But before we start, a quick primer on nonprofit operations. So most nonprofits have to raise funds to pay for, to keep the lights on, to pay rent, pay salaries, other operating expenses. And they often do this by seeking donations from individuals like you all or us, and institutional donors, let's say the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So they're raising funds, and they're constantly raising funds. Every day, every night, I was a fundraiser. It's like that's what you dream when you go to bed at night, about fundraising. So you're raising money to keep money flowing in the door. Another strategy that nonprofits use to stretch those dollars they've raised is to bring in volunteers. So volunteers that can support their staff and extend the capacity of the organization to deliver its mission. So we're going to jump right into the first use case, which is a fundraising use case. Adim, which means step by step in Turkish, is a nonprofit organization based in Turkey. They organize charity runs to get more Turkish people involved in charitable giving. Historically, only about 10% of charitable giving in Turkey has come from individual donors, so they set out to change that. So Adim, like many a nonprofit before it, started out managing data using spreadsheets. They quickly found themselves having to manage 65,000 rows of data in spreadsheets and pivot tables. Clearly, this made their scaling their mission virtually impossible. So they decided to implement the Nonprofit Success Pack on Salesforce. This enabled them to centralize all the data about their charity runners, donors, and the nonprofit organizations that they were supporting. They also built an app on Salesforce to accept donations online and to give real-time visibility to donations as they were made. The app did some other really cool things too. For example, it provided leaderboards, awards, badges, and rankings to charity runners to keep them motivated as they were training and fundraising. So fortunately, they were able to launch their app just in time for the 2015 Istanbul Marathon. Some 1,500 Adim runners raised over $750,000 for nonprofits in Turkey. In Turkey, this is unheard of. I mean, this is pretty common practice here in the US, but for Turkey, this was like a really big deal. So with the help of Salesforce, Adim was able to increase the number of charity runners by 90%, the number of donors by 110%, and the overall amount of donations by 50%. So this was a pretty extraordinary win for both Salesforce.org and for Adim. So the second use case we're going to talk about today is about volunteer management. St. Anthony's is a nonprofit organization based right here in San Francisco. They've been providing hot meals, clothing, and other social services to homeless San Franciscans since about 1950. Volunteers have always played a really crucial role in delivering services, but staff often found themselves spending way too much time coordinating volunteer schedules through multiple emails and paperwork. So they decided to implement the Nonprofit Success Pack and integrate Salesforce with their website to manage their entire volunteer program. So for the first time, volunteers could sign up for a volunteer shift, they could cancel a shift, reschedule a shift, and see their entire volunteer history all online. Salesforce also made it easy for staff to target volunteer recruiting efforts by giving them visibility into which programs needed more support. Salesforce also gave them the ability to track key metrics, metrics like volunteer retention, which is a huge metric in the nonprofit world. So by being able to track volunteer retention, they could test different strategies for keeping the volunteers they already have, which is way more cost-effective than going out and recruiting and training new volunteers. So during the first year they were on Salesforce, St. Anthony's doubled the number of first-time volunteers in their program. So another big win for Salesforce and a nonprofit customer. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mark for a deep dive into the Nonprofit Success Pack.
All right, I know you've been waiting for this, and hopefully Jason has inspired you with some great stories of how nonprofits are actually using Salesforce. But let's dig into the NPSP, and I'm going to get under the hood. I have an NPSP org, hopefully still there behind the scenes, which we're going to look at. So NPSP under the hood consists of 6 managed packages. You might be asking, why 6 and not just one? The short version is backwards compatibility. And I'm going to talk about the history of the NPSP in a bit. But basically, the NPSP used to be split into separate packages, and now it has been combined into one giant managed package. If you're a super technical nerd out there, you know that you can't push new things. And anyway, short version, it's 6 managed packages, but all the code lives in the Nonprofit Success Pack package. All the code, by the way, is available. It is open source on GitHub. And I'm going to give you a URL at the end, which is going to have all the links to all the resources that are in this presentation. But you can still take pictures if you want. Also, something to note is if your package versions start with the number 2 or earlier, then you will need to upgrade ASAP to NPSP 3. The URL there is where you can do that. If your organization has started using NPSP since 2014 you are fine. But if the organization got Salesforce and the NPSP prior to 2014, then you should definitely double check that you're on the latest version of the NPSP. So you know NPSP 3 and above will just auto-update, and there are releases every 2 weeks. You don't necessarily have to take any action for that. So NPSP is different from the Salesforce that you might be used to. If you've used kind of standard Salesforce, you're used to the account contact model, this is different. There is a new household account record type that has been created on the account object. Households are automatically created for every single contact in the NPSP using NPSP triggers. Opportunities are associated to the household and the contact via a specific contact role. And the NPSP has custom fields, custom objects, code, and a dedicated NPSP settings tab. If you are truly wanting to do your volunteering job right, you want to get hands-on and familiar with the NPSP prior to touching anyone else's Salesforce instance. So just a brief history of the household account model and why we've done things the way that we have, because you might be thinking, this seems crazy. Why did we create a record type on accounts? Well, back in the day, we said we're going to keep it simple. We're going to use one individual account and associate all the contacts with that single individual account. Well, here's what's great about that model, simplicity. Here's what's not great about that model. Everything else. Reporting sucks. If you have a lot of contacts, things start breaking. It's just very kludgy and clunky, and we moved away from that to the one-to-one account model. This is essentially, there was a hidden account behind every single contact, and there was a separate custom object used to track information about the household. So this was better, but still not great. Also, there was some code that kind of prevented you from seeing the account behind the scenes, and you, I'm not going to talk about that. Anyway, short version is, this is a legacy model. There are still organizations that are using this model, but we've really encouraged people to move to NPSP 3. This account model, where we are using a record type on the account as a way to keep track of information about where one or more donors or members live, is actually the cleanest way that we've found to kind of do all the roll-ups and the reporting. You might be asking, well, that's great, but how do I then account for the related account, right? Because you're used to the contact account, right? Account is where somebody works, contact is the person. We have created a junction object called affiliations to do that, to account for that. So we have a contact, which is then affiliated to an organizational account. What's nice about that is you can then connect to multiple accounts. So the affiliation can keep track of your current role, the date that that connection started. And I'm going to show you this in a minute. But short version is NPSP 3, the household account model, that's what you want to be using, and that's what your nonprofit that you volunteer with should be using as well. I was just about to ask any questions about that, but we'll just save those for the end. So this is a little hard to read, so I'm probably just going to show this in the demo, but short version is if you leave the account name blank when you're creating a contact, that household will then be automatically created for you. Well, I'll show it in the demo. This is what affiliations looks like. Kind of hard to read. We'll do the demo. Okay. So for those of you that are at nonprofit organizations, this is probably familiar to you already. But for those of you that aren't, we've tried to translate the core Salesforce objects into nonprofitese, nonprofit speak. So contacts, right? Those are people. They're donors. They could be members. They could be people who work at other nonprofit organizations, and so on. Accounts, I've already mentioned that we have two record types on account. We have the organization record type. That's used for tracking information about companies, corporate sponsors, any foundations or grant makers, and the households, which are used for where one or more donors or members lives. Opportunities, think of these as any incoming dollars. So opportunities, in the sales context, right? That's a sales deal. Here, think of it like a donation, a grant, t-shirt sales, memberships, and so on, right? It's just incoming money. Activities, these actually are exactly the same as they are in the kind of regular Salesforce world. You're tracking information, right? It's a phone call, it's an email, and so on. Campaigns, similar, not exactly the same, but again, it's targeted outreach, right? So this could be in the form of a fundraising event, could be a mass mailing, could be an email blast, class registration, and so on. Also, if you're using the Volunteers for Salesforce package, we actually have a volunteer campaign, and there's a whole trail about that, which I'll link to later. And actually, if you've used your Events app, you'll notice that there are related trails for this session on your Events app. So if you're interested, by all means, check those out. They're right there. And then leads, finally, is anyone that might potentially be interested in the organization. Again, sort of similar to the sales lead, same idea. Here it is, the live demo. Are you guys ready? Yay! Live demo. All right. Okay, good. Here we are. Uh-oh, we're losing people at the live demo. Oh, well. Well, yeah, it hasn't even crashed yet. It's still working. Come on, sheesh. Okay, so I just want to show you the kind of Nonprofit Success Pack tab. You'll notice, by the way, we are in Lightning. If you are not in Lightning, you can find out all sorts of Lightning things at all the booths, so I encourage you to check those out. But first, I just want you to take a look at the homepage for a second here. So if you'll notice, the homepage does not look like a standard Salesforce homepage, right? We've customized this to make sure that this is relevant, useful, and has stuff that is interesting for a potential nonprofit customer. So for those of you that are volunteering, you may have never seen this stuff before. This is by all means your first step. And you're logging in with a dedicated user license, right? Not a shared one like I talked about earlier. So you log in with that dedicated user license and you can see, right, there's all sorts of stuff here. There's links to trails, there's links to dive deeper, links into the Power of Us Hub. So you can imagine this is extremely useful for the first-time Nonprofit Success Pack user, but for you as a volunteer, this is also a wealth of information. All right, spent enough time on the homepage. Let's click into a contact. So here is my friend, Daniel Martinez. Daniel has some information about him. You'll notice in the highlights panel up here, I can see his account. I can see that his affiliation up here. So that's, in this case, his employer. And I'm going to do an affiliation example in a minute here. But let me just scroll down. I just want to show you, right? So his account name is his household. And I've got his mailing address here in his contact record, and that is also in his household record. I'm going to go down here. So let me just scroll down. Oh, along the right-hand side here in the activity panel. So just take a look. I've got to call Daniel about his 2018 pledge. So Jason in his fundraising days, right? This is his world where he's, hi, Daniel Martinez, I'm so glad to talk to you. I'd love to find out about your renewing your pledge this year, so et cetera. Yeah, how are your kids? Exactly. And in theory, if your fundraising team is doing your job right, the information about Daniel's family is all in here in his Salesforce record. But this is not a pitch for the Nonprofit Success Pack. It's awesome. This is just to give you enough information so that you know what you're getting into here. So let me just scroll down a little bit. So one of the capabilities of the Nonprofit Success Pack is to create multiple addresses. So for folks that are lucky enough to have seasonal addresses who live in different domiciles for different periods of time, you can track that here. So addresses are stored on the contact record itself, but also you can have seasonal addresses, and there's a separate address object as part of the Nonprofit Success Pack. All right, so let me scroll down here into the money, the good stuff. So we've got some donation information. So note these custom fields. These have all been populated by the Nonprofit Success Pack for us. So what's the most recent gift date, the last gift date? When was Daniel's first gift date? The average gift amount, the best gift year, so when Daniel gave the most. Again, last gift amount, what was that largest gift, smallest gift, and so on. You can see there are a bunch of totals here. This makes reporting much, much simpler, right? Where before you would have had to do things like roll-up summary fields or using some of the tools like declarative roll-up summary app on the App Exchange and so on. The NPSP code takes care of a lot of this stuff for you, which is really, really great. Soft credits, hard credits, I'm not going to get into that stuff. This ventures well into the world of super crazy fundraising. I recommend that you check out our Trailhead Trail, which is dedicated just to this, which has some more information about this. And if you're really excited to talk fundraising, I'm sure Jason would love to talk with you too. Yes, what's also fun is we track the household donation info. So we have the contact who's donated information, but what if the contact's spouse has also donated? Well, we've got the donation information for the household also tracked on the contact, which is pretty cool. So you can get real fancy and assign a contact credit for the spouse's donation and so on and so forth. So just some basics of what the contact looks like. Also, we have those affiliations, right? So let me just go, we have a primary affiliation here of Acme Corporation. So let me just pop into Acme here. So again, this is an organization account record type. This is not the household, this is the organization. This is a corporation based in my neighborhood of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And again, I've got information here about the company. And again, there's some next steps here that somebody needs to do. If I go into the related items here, I can see we have some donations from the company. So these are corporate donations. These are not individual donations. And again, I can see that, right? These amounts here, $10,000 and so on. So again, I've got those two different types of accounts. We have the household account and the organizational account. The other thing that I wanted to show you was the opportunity. So let's go back to Daniel, and let's have Daniel give us a new donation. So we have, right up here in the quick actions, there it is, new donation. So the donation, the opportunity name here has been automatically named. The donation stages here are a little bit different, the opportunity stages, than what you're used to. We've got a whole bunch of pre-set stages based on the best practices of the Nonprofit Success Pack. So we have a standard stage here of posted. This is equivalent to a closed-won opportunity stage, right? It means we got the money. How much is Daniel going to give us? Anyone? Shout out a number. $1 million. You're really making me work for it, huh? Daniel's big money bags. Awesome. Cool. Also, something fun here, primary campaign source. So if Daniel gave us this money as part of a fundraising event or as part of a mass mailing that I did, I would then associate this donation back to that campaign so I could then go back later, look at that campaign record, and see how many donations came in as a result of it. I don't think I have a campaign in here. I'm just going to click Save for right now. $1 million. All right, the balls are bubbling. And then let's see what happens. So ideally, what's going to happen is the donation amounts are going to update on this contact record. And notice the total gifts have updated here as well to $1,850,000. Thank you, person in the back who suggested $1 million. And if we scroll down here, his last gift amount is $1 million. And his best gift year ever has now changed to right now, right? And for the record, that'll probably be his best gift year ever. So anyway, one more thing that I want to show you, and then I'm going to turn it back to Jason here, and that is I wanted to show you the NPSP settings tab. Again, this is something that's pretty different. So you're probably used to going into setup, but the NPSP settings actually has its own whole tab. And it takes a minute to load the first time. Should have preloaded this, that's all right. But the NPSP settings are dedicated to just settings changing how the NPSP behaves. So things like the household naming convention, things like the opportunity naming, things like tracking relationships between people. There is a ton of stuff here that you can tweak. I'm not going to change any of these things. I just want to show you this. So you can see it sort of like kind of looks like setup, or how setup used to look anyway. So the idea behind the NPSP settings tab is this is where you can go to modify actually how NPSP works itself under the hood. All right, I've shown you enough. Hopefully you are super, super excited about working with the NPSP based on that. And there's one more thing, a couple more things. By the way, in case all of that was too boring, NPSP has its own data import process. So this is something that you should definitely know about if you're going to volunteer. There is a whole, you can provide a CSV flat file that has information about donors, donations, where the household lives, any companies. You can take that flat file, import it into a custom object, the NPSP data import custom object, run a processing tool, which then parses all that data and puts it all in the right places and maintains the relationships. Boom, mic drop. It's amazing. It is actually really awesome. If you want to learn more, there's a whole workbook here. And again, I'm going to give you a link at the end, so I'm teasing this so you stay for the whole presentation, which has all the links in the presentation. Here's a bunch of resources. Okay, you don't have to stay to the end. All the links. There you go. Take a picture of this, please. This is where all the stuff is. All right, I hear cameras clicking. Good. All right, when I see the last phone go down, I'll move on. All right, awesome. All right, Jason, take it away.
Awesome.
Let's tell us about some volunteering best practices.
Thank you. So, yeah, we're going to go over some volunteering best practices to give you a sense of how to work effectively with nonprofits. But before we do that, does anyone know who said this quote? Just shout it out. Anyone know? No, not Spider-Man.
It's Uncle Ben, right?
Uncle Ben.
Yeah, but from Spider-Man.
From Spider-Man, very close, yes. So Uncle Ben is Peter Parker's uncle, and Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Spoiler alert, that's right, sorry.
You don't know.
It's too late, sorry. Like Ben Parker, I'm here to remind you that with great power comes great responsibility. So the rest of the session, we're going to talk about some common pitfalls to avoid when working with nonprofits and give you some tips and tricks for how to avoid them. Okay, so this is an actual quote from a customer, a nonprofit customer. We implemented what we thought we needed on Salesforce. The consultant should have helped us determine what we really needed. So one common pitfall that people make when working with nonprofits is not taking enough time up front to really get to know their underlying business needs. So I encourage everybody, get to know the nonprofit's mission, the programs and services they provide. Quick way to start, explore their website, read any articles that have been written about them, and spend the first 1 or 2 meetings to clarify any questions you have about the nonprofit's mission and how it goes about achieving impact. This will lay the groundwork for you to really dig into those underlying business needs, business processes, and challenges that they're experiencing. So please do some homework up front. And don't be afraid or shy to ask why. Keep asking why until you push through to those underlying needs. Here's another quote from a nonprofit customer. We should have configured, not customized. Big mistake on our part. If I only knew then what I know now. Another common mistake that we see when working with nonprofits is recommending solutions that are not sustainable. If you recall a few slides back, you learned that many nonprofits simply don't have the capacity to develop and support technology. So most likely they won't be able to maintain custom code after you're gone. So please learn the nonprofit the nonprofit success pack. Learn its tools and use standard objects when possible. And as always, document what you do for the future reference of the nonprofit. And the last tip I'll leave you with here is show, not do. And what I mean by this is transfer your knowledge and skills to the nonprofit by showing them how to do a task instead of just doing it for them. All right, so this is the one last grumpy quote we're going to share with you, I promise. Scheduling became an issue. The volunteer kept missing meetings, so we had to reschedule a lot. And then I just never heard back. So I'm going to preface this by saying I think most of our volunteers are pretty awesome and are responsible. And I expect everyone in here will be responsible too. So this gets us to our final pitfall to avoid. Please treat volunteering like a paid engagement. Avoid canceling and rescheduling. I mean, you certainly wouldn't do that with a paying client. And be realistic about your timeline. Make sure it's based on your availability and try to stick to it as much as possible. And I give you all permission to only have an hour or 2 a week to work on a nonprofit project. That's okay. Be honest with the nonprofit and clearly communicate your availability with them. And then, of course, be prompt in communication with nonprofits. Try not to leave them hanging. All right, so this is what using your Salesforce powers responsibly looks like. We were very impressed with our volunteers' professionalism. Their support has helped us feed even more people in need. If your solution is sustainable, meets underlying business needs, and you treat volunteering like a paid engagement, you can help nonprofits do some pretty amazing things. And I'll leave you with this last quote. This is from an actual Salesforce volunteer. Pro bono volunteer work reminds me why I love my job. I love watching Salesforce transform organizations. So I'm willing to bet that you will get just as much out of a volunteering engagement as a nonprofit will. So on that high note, I'm going to turn it back over to Mark.
What can you do right now? Please complete the session survey. It is in your app. We really want you to tell us what you thought of today's session. Be a trailblazer. There are all sorts of trailhead trails. There's a link right there. And by the way, all the links at that URL right there. And join a nonprofit user group. I guarantee you, wherever you are, there is probably a nonprofit user group near you. If for some reason there is not, there is also a group in the Trailblazer community called Nonprofits Using Salesforce. Go in there, raise your hand, say you went to this session. I can help you, and I promise I won't mess it up. All right? You ready to do it? All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for coming today.